Hi, I'm Louis Magnifico. Years ago, long before I returned home to the Catholic faith after spending 30 years as a Protestant, I met my friend John at a megachurch we were both attending. John and I became close friends, and we spent hours poring over Scripture and studying the Bible. We even launched a short-lived ministry in the early 2000s. So you can imagine John's surprise when I told him one day that I was returning to the Catholic faith that I had left behind so many years before. Having spent his entire life as a devout Protestant with Calvinist Reformed leanings, he had many questions for me. John and I decided he would record some of his questions and send them to me so that I could in turn record a response. We're inviting you to witness our dialogue about the Catholic faith through this series, as John is on a journey of discovery and learning more about the Catholic faith each day. This is Questioning Catholicism.
Do saints hear our prayers? Ecclesiastes 9:5 says, "The dead know nothing. The memory of them is forgotten." So how do saints in heaven hear millions of prayers?
Welcome to episode 5 of Questioning Catholicism, where my Protestant friend John is asking questions about the Catholic faith as he journeys towards Rome. So John's question about Ecclesiastes 9:5 is actually a question in which both Catholics and many Protestants wrestle. The only reason this should be posed as a uniquely Catholic question is because of our understanding that saints hear our prayers and make intercession on our behalf. But most evangelical Protestants that I know would also believe doctrines that seem to not align with this verse on the surface. So what exactly is going on with this verse and with Ecclesiastes as a whole? Let's take a look. First of all, it's important to understand that the book of Ecclesiastes is not like other books of the Bible. It is wisdom literature like Proverbs and Sirach and Wisdom, and it's written from a unique perspective for a unique purpose. It's not the same type of literature as, for example, the Gospels or the Law and the Prophets. It's not even like other wisdom literature. Ecclesiastes is, at its core, trying to solve a philosophical problem. The Ignatius Catholic Study Bible introduces the book of Ecclesiastes, suggesting that it reveals the problem to which the rest of the Bible offers the solution. Namely, the problem that life is meaningless if death is our ultimate destiny and if man has no hope for happiness that reaches beyond the grave. But as the rest of the Bible proves, we do have hope, especially in light of the resurrection of Christ and the opening of heaven for the faithful. We don't read Ecclesiastes as if it were a theological document, such as Paul's letter to the Romans. We read it more like the book of Job, where different viewpoints are brought up in a dialogue. Throughout Ecclesiastes, the author considers differing views on the meaning of life without endorsing any of them. Therefore, you can't take one verse out of the book and then call it dogmatic teaching. The author leans on human reasoning to discover life's purpose rather than revealing divine revelation. And the author leaves the reader with the conclusion that from the human perspective, all is vanity. And since the book views the world from human reasoning and perspective, we should not read verses like Ecclesiastes 9:5 as doctrinal statements from the church, since the purpose is really just to state the seemingly pessimistic conclusion that we all end up in the same place, dead. But even so, there are scholars who will point out the author's use of the phrase "under the sun" so often in these passages in Ecclesiastes. Verses like, "They have no more forever any share in all that is done under the sun." By the end of the book, the author pivots from this and says, "For God will bring every deed into judgment." These scholars teach that the author of Ecclesiastes focuses on what happens under the sun during life, all the way until the end of the book, when he shifts from under the sun to the afterlife, when we finally get to make sense of all that is happening around us. Secondly, and along those lines, we need to realize that the full revelation and understanding of life after death wasn't clearly understood among the ancient Jews prior to Christ. This doctrine developed over time, and not until Jesus' resurrection and ascension do we find more clear and definitive teachings on this matter. Finally, to drive home the fact that the dead certainly do not know nothing and that this verse in Ecclesiastes should be read in the proper context of the subject matter of the book, let's look at what we know from the rest of Scripture. In the Transfiguration, Moses and Elijah come back and interact with Jesus in the presence of Peter, James, and John. In the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 28, we read that the spirit of King Saul was called up. In the Gospels and in the book of Acts, several among the dead are raised by Jesus and the apostles. In Luke chapter 16, Jesus tells of Lazarus and the rich man who both died. In this story, Jesus explains conversations held in the realm of the dead. In Matthew 22, Jesus explains to the Sadducees that God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that God is the God of the living, implying that the deceased in Abraham's bosom are still very much alive. In Revelation chapter 6, we read about the souls of the martyrs crying out for justice. So you can see that in these examples, and these are just a few examples out of many that I could have brought up, the dead certainly did not find that they knew nothing, or even that they had no part forevermore in anything done under the sun. Hopefully, understanding more about the nature of the book of Ecclesiastes, realizing that doctrine on the afterlife developed over a long span of time, and understanding that after the resurrection, Christ opened heaven to the faithful, you can see that it just isn't accurate to suggest that the dead know nothing.